So the blood pressure, the blood glucose, and the levels of electrolytes in the human body are always regulated in a narrow limit. So there's a particular level for everything. Now, whenever blood pressure, blood glucose, anything should increase, the body works to decrease those things. Whenever they decrease, what does the body do? It works to increase back to the normal. And this process is called homeostasis. Homeostasis is achieved majorly by two different systems in the human body. The endocrine system, which is quite slow in its action, but yet still has sustained action. And then the nervous system, which is quite rapid in its action, but yet still that action is fast. So it is fast and then it just lasts for a short time. We have the endocrine, which is quite slow. It does not come out to start, but once it starts, it stays for a long time. So in today's class, we're going to be learning about the endocrine system. So introduction to endocrinology. So if you are new to this channel, ensure you subscribe to this channel and then go ahead to watch the video. Surely it will be enjoyable. Now, what is the endocrine system? Whenever we speak of a system, we look at a set of tissues that are carrying out a particular function. So right here, the endocrine system, I would say there are cells, there are tissues, there are glands, whose main aim is to produce hormones, which are the endocrine guys, to produce hormones. And these hormones are to act, like I said earlier, to regulate the level of different things in our human body. So let's dive right in. What are we to know? When we come to endocrinology, like I said earlier, very importantly, their action, the onset of action is slow onset of action. Then beyond saying they have slow onset of action, their action is sustained. And beyond that, their action is widespread. So what do I mean by the action is sustained? That means when they start acting, they stay acting for a long time. I could use blood pressure, for example. When our blood pressure is low and hormones are called into action, they don't rush in, but once they start, they will stay acting for a long time. And then beyond that, an hormone, because it is carried in blood, can go to different parts of the body. So it's more like generalized action. This is in contrast to nervous system where your action it's fast, but then it is localized. So here it is generalized. And so those are the things to note. So let's go straight in. So when we mention endocrine physiology, the first thing that comes into our minds is hormones. So the big question is, who is an hormone? Who is an hormone? In simple terms, an hormone is a chemical messenger. An hormone is a chemical messenger who usually acts on receptors. These receptors can be located in different points. We're going to see that in today's video. There are chemical messengers that act on receptors. They are usually released or secreted in minute quantity. Then they are released into blood. Of course, this will be specifically the endocrine hormones. They are released into blood and carried to target tissues where they affect the action. All right, so who are hormones? They are chemical messengers, point one. They act on receptors. So as they are messengers, when they get to a particular target tissue, a particular cell, they will bind to a receptor. So that's acting on a receptor. And when they bind to this receptor, remember they are only released in minute quantity. Like I said, their action is sustained and widespread. So you cannot produce them too much. So you produce them in small quantities that can do the action. Then most of them, which we call endocrine hormones, are released into the blood and they are carried to target tissues. If you heard me say most of them, it's because there are some hormones, after being released, they just act around that location. Around maybe the interstitial tissue, within that same tissue, we call them paracrine hormones. And there are some people that when they are released by a particular cell, they come back and act on their self. Those are called autocrine hormones. So generally we have endocrine, we have paracrine, we have autocrine, and then we have neurocrine. So like I said, endocrine hormones, after being produced, they are carried in blood to different parts of the body to do the action. Now, paracrine, after being produced, at that same tissue, they effect the action, or neighboring tissues, they will effect the action, neighboring places. Then when we come to autocrine, the same cell that released it, or the same gland, is the person I'm acting on. The neurocrine is now a case where I have a particular neuron releasing the hormone. So we see that in adrenal medulla. All right, so that is that for that. Now, the next thing that's important about hormones is their sources. Where do I get hormones from? Now, the hormones are produced from different places in the human body. Of course, I was only able to capture a few, or the most important ones. So, for example, in the hypothalamus, which is in the brain, the hypothalamus releases hormones called releasing and inhibiting factors. The idea of calling them releasing factors are that they are hormones that will help another person to release its own hormones. Then inhibiting factors is that there are hormones that will help, that will cause another gland to stop producing its own hormones. So releasing factors, I go and ask another organ, tell him, okay, release. Inhibiting, I go to another place and tell him, don't release. So who are these hormones? Growth hormone releasing hormone, growth hormone inhibiting hormone, also called somatostatin, gonadotropin releasing hormone, thyrotropin releasing hormone, corticotropin releasing hormone, and then prolactin inhibiting hormone, also called dopamine. Now, there's something I would be focusing on as we go on. But whenever you see the word tropin, it means that the hormone in question, remember it is gonadotropin releasing hormone. That means this hormone will cause the release of gonadotropins. The hormone in question called gonadotropin is going to be an hormone that will cause the gonads to grow and release another hormone. Thyrotropin to be an hormone that will cause the thyroid gland to grow and release another. But we'll get there. So at least for now, let's take note of the hormones by the hypothalamus. Then anterior pituitary is another place we have hormones produced. Then we have growth hormone. So the things from the hypothalamus, their effect is on the pituitary gland. So you observe something. The growth hormone releasing hormone will cause anterior pituitary to produce growth hormone, while growth hormone inhibiting hormone will prevent him from producing this. Now I go ahead. The gonadotropin releasing hormone will cause anterior pituitary to produce the gonadotropins, which are 2 in number, follicle stimulating and luteinizing hormone. Then beyond that, thyrotropin releasing hormone will cause our anterior pituitary to produce the thyrotropin, also called thyroid stimulating hormone. Similarly, corticotropin releasing hormone will cause him to produce corticotropin, which is also called adrenocorticotrophic hormone. Like the ideas of this name, like I said, corticotropin will cause the adrenal cortex to grow. It has another name, adrenocorticotrophic hormone. Now, the last guy, prolactin inhibiting hormone, who inhibits the release of prolactin. The person that stimulates its release is thyrotropin releasing hormone. So TRH is for 2 people, release of TSH and release of prolactin. But what inhibits its own release is dopamine. So we observe that. Now, what else can we see? In posterior, we have oxytocin, adrenocortical, so antidiuretic hormone, or ADH. Please, in anterior pituitary, some people make mention of a particular hormone called melanocyte stimulating hormone that helps with the stimulation of melanocyte production in our skin. Thyroid gland produces the thyroid hormones T3 and T4, and then it produces another hormone called calcitonin involved in calcium regulation. Now we have parathyroid gland producing parath hormone. We have adrenal cortex producing cortisol, which is an example of a corticosteroids generally. Then it produces aldosterone, which is an example of a mineralocorticoid. Now those names given, glucocorticoid. When I say glucocorticoid, what does it mean? It means you are involved in regulation of glucose. Gluco, corti, you are produced from adrenal cortex. So it is involved in regulations. A particular hormone produced from the adrenal cortex involved in regulation of glucose. So that is just the idea. Cortisol is an example. Then another person produces aldosterone. Then we have some androgens produced. Now, in the adrenal medulla, what do we have? Adrenaline and noradrenaline, of which adrenaline is a major person, about 80%. The ratio is 80 to 20. Then endocrine pancreas. When we go to the pancreas, it is important you add the word endocrine because the pancreas has 2 parts. We have the endocrine part, which is just 20% and the exocrine, which is most of it, which is 80%. Of course, exocrine means it's producing digestive enzymes, producing the enzymes there, and the juice, pancreatic juice. So right here in the endocrine, I have glucagon produced by the alpha cells, islets of Langerhans, and then insulin produced by the beta cells. Now, we have the testes, the male gonad producing testosterone, and the female gonad producing estrogen and progesterone. And placenta, which of course is not a regular thing, only in pregnant women, is involved in production of estrogen, progesterone, human chorionic gonadotropin used in testing for pregnancy, and then human placental lactogen, which is important in the growing child. So it helps the child grow. So it will shunt the necessary nutrients to the mother and shunt them to the child. All right, so we'll go into the details of the function of these hormones in our subsequent videos in this endocrinology playlist. But for now, we'll just stay on the surface. So these are hormones produced from different sides of the body. Of course, the kidney can also produce hormone. We have renin involved in the RAS system, renin-angiotensin aldosterone system. We have erythropoietin involved in erythropoiesis, which is the production of red cells. And then we have calcitriol involved, also called activated vitamin D, involved in calcium regulation. All right, so let's come back to our hormones. So these are the places I can get hormones, the sources of hormone, or the sites of hormone secretion. It is important we know, since we said hormones are chemical messengers, it's important we know what are the classes of hormones we have. Now, hormones are classified based on their chemical nature. Hormones are classified based on their chemical nature into three. The first class, there are three classes. The first class is called protein and peptides. The second class is called amines. Some people call it amino acid derivatives. So they are called amines or amino acid derivatives. Then the third class are called steroids. Some people make mention of other classes, but these are the three generally accepted classes of hormones. So yeah, they are based on their chemical nature. I could have protein and peptides, so that's proteins. I can have amines. Amines are just generally derivatives of amino acids. And then we have steroids. Now, protein and peptides is the largest class. It has most of the hormones in the human body. In fact, if you are told in an exam, which class does this hormone belong to? If you don't know, most likely it has to be a protein or a peptide. So it has to be in the class 1. So these protein and peptides, they are hormones that are produced the same way we have other hormones produced. So the key thing to note about protein and peptides is their examples. So all hypothalamic hormones except dopamine. So from the name you see dopamine, amine. So amine means it will be in class 2. But every other single person is in class 1. Similarly, all anterior pituitary and posterior pituitary hormones are protein and peptides. Let me repeat it. All hypothalamic hormones except dopamine is a protein and peptide hormone. All anterior pituitary and posterior pituitary hormones are protein and peptides. I go down. Parathyroid hormone, that is the hormone from parathyroid gland, is a protein and peptide. Similarly, calcitonin is also a protein and a peptide. I go to my endocrine pancreas. The hormones of the endocrine pancreas, which is glucagon and insulin, are also protein and peptides. They're also protein and peptides. Then, of course, you have your gonadotropin and this other guy also being protein and peptides. Then I come here, similarly, these are all, okay, apart from activated vitamin D, erythropoietin and renin are all protein and peptides. So you observe from the vast amount of hormones I have here, almost every single one is protein and peptides. So we see here, except dopamine, everything here, nobody from thyroid gland except calcitonin, everything here, nothing from adrenal cortex, nothing from adrenal medulla, all endocrine pancreas, nothing from the gonads. But when you get to placenta, HCG and HPL are protein and peptides. Then when you go to amines, who are my amines here? My amines include thyroid hormones. Why? They are produced derivatives of a particular guy we call tyrosine, a particular amino acid. Then beyond thyroid hormones, I have my adrenal medullary hormones, which are adrenaline and noradrenaline. And then beyond that, we also have our, I think those are the guys. I have my adrenaline, noradrenaline, I have thyroid hormones, and then I have dopamine. So those are my amines. Then for the steroids include, these are gonadal hormones, which is testosterone, estrogen, and progesterone. Also, the steroids here would include my calcitriol. So what are the key things about these hormones? Now, the protein and peptides are produced like every other hormone. So you go through the normal transcription, translation, post-translational modification, and you have an hormone. The amines are produced from the amino acid called tyrosine. So from tyrosine, I have modifications on tyrosine that converts them into amines. Then steroids are produced from cholesterol. So the source of steroids is what? Cholesterol. Please, this is very important. Note that the source of steroid hormones is cholesterol. The source of amines is what? Tyrosine. And the source of proteins is that they are formed from the DNA. So I would follow this pattern that in the nucleus there's transcription to mRNA. I carry it out, go to the ribosomes, which are located on the endoplasmic reticulum. And what will happen there? There will be translation. So that my mRNA will now be read into a protein. So I'll carry it inside the endoplasmic reticulum and do some modifications. So anything done after translation is called post-translational modification. So I'll do some of them in that endoplasmic reticulum. Now do the rest in Golgi apparatus, where they are now packaged into secretory vesicles. Now it is important to note too that protein and peptide hormones will be in vesicles. So you release them where you want to release them. Whereas these other two, of course, they are not quite packaged. Now, sorry, the steroids are not packaged. Amines are also packaged. Now, something else that is important for us to note is that protein and peptides and amines are soluble in water. So because of that, they can be carried freely in blood without any help. Whereas steroid hormones and a particular amine called thyroid hormones require proteins. So this class are proteins already, so they are soluble. Whereas steroids are insoluble. So steroids will require a carrier protein. Most times it's always albumin. Similarly, amines will require that carrier protein. And so most times we see the amines that require it is only the thyroid hormones. So that is that. But so that covers our classes, protein and peptides, which is most of everybody, amines and the amino acid derivative. Then we have the steroids. Now we go on. Now the next thing that is quite important to us is how these hormones will act. But let's look at the receptors. We observe that if this is a cell, like I had earlier said, the human cell should have the cell membrane, it should have a nucleus, and then the cytoplasm. Now, what we observe is that our protein hormones, protein and peptide hormones, because these guys are generally insoluble, sorry, they're generally soluble in water, but insoluble in lipid membrane. So they are water soluble. They can pass freely in blood, no problem. But when they get to the target tissue, they cannot go inside. Why? Because they are insoluble in lipids. And remember, in our videos on transport across cell membrane, we established that things that can pass across the cell membrane have to be lipid soluble for them to pass freely. These guys are water soluble, so they cannot pass. So what do? They have receptors on the surface. So they will come and bind to their receptor. And once they bind to their receptor, they will activate an enzyme inside the cell that will help them do the action. So protein and peptide hormones act this way. They come in, they bind to their receptor, which is where? On the cell surface, the cell membrane. So they have membrane receptors. So that is very important to know, that protein and peptide hormones have membrane receptors. So I come, I bind. After binding, I activate an enzyme inside, which will help me do my action. Usually we call that second messenger mechanism. where the first messenger is our hormone, the chemical messenger, comes and binds to the receptor. And when it binds to the receptor, what is now causing another person inside to help him do his action. Now, beyond the membrane receptors, we also have, this is also not just protein and peptide, but amines to do the same thing. The only amine that does not follow this pattern is thyroid hormones. And what do thyroid hormones do? They have this channel for them. So when they come in, they pass through that channel and go inside. But their receptor is in the nucleus. So their receptor is in the nucleus. So we say they have nuclear receptors. That's for thyroid hormone. Then the steroid hormones, which is in class 3. Steroid hormones are lipid soluble. So they will pass here freely without any form of issues. And they have their receptors in the cytoplasm. So we call them cytoplasmic receptors. So generally, there are 3 places the receptors of hormones can be located. Either on the cell surface, the membrane receptors, which are majorly for proteins and amines. Why? These guys are soluble in water but insoluble in the membrane. They cannot pass freely. So whenever they bind on the outside, which mechanism are they using? They will use another messenger within the cells. It's called second messenger mechanism. Now, on the other hand, I have my thyroid hormones, which will come in, pass freely through a channel, but their target is nuclear receptors, the receptors in the nucleus. I have steroid hormones who will come in freely. Why? They're lipid soluble. That's the same reason for this guy. When they're inside, what do? They bind to cytoplasmic receptors. And so that covers the introduction to endocrinology. In our next video, we will talk deeply into the mechanism of actions, and then in subsequent videos, we'll pick each of the glands to learn about their hormones and everything about them. So thank you very much for joining us. Please do well to like this video, do well to share this video to as many people as possible. If you have some struggles understanding, rewatch the video again, and then ensure you subscribe to this channel. Thank you very much for joining us.